It was one of those quiet Friday nights that felt like a soft exhale after a long week. I was curled up on the couch in my favorite pajamas, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside my book. The house was calm, that kind of stillness that used to feel comforting, but lately just reminded me how quiet things had become. Then my phone rang, and Ryan's name lit up the screen. His voice came through cheerful, a little loud over the background noise. "Hey, babe, the party's running late. Could you pick me up? I had a few drinks." I smiled without thinking. "Of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just like that, I was back in motion, sliding off the couch, heart a little lighter. "You're the best," he said before hanging up, and for a second I felt warm all over. Maybe things were okay. Maybe we were okay. He could have taken a cab, sure, but he'd called me. That had to mean something, right? I threw on jeans and a sweater, pulled my hair into a loose ponytail, and grabbed my car keys. There was a small, silly comfort in the idea of driving to pick him up, like old times, before late meetings and forgotten dinners became normal. As I started the car, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I smiled at myself, trying to believe that maybe tonight was a sign we were finding our way back. The roads were quiet, the kind of stillness that makes the world feel smaller. Streetlights stretched like golden threads over the asphalt as I drove, humming softly to fill the silence. I caught myself thinking about us. How easy things used to be when a simple call from Ryan could make me smile for hours. Somewhere along the years, that ease had faded, replaced by polite conversations and distracted glances. But tonight, I let myself believe this was his way of reaching out. A tiny olive branch after months of distance. When I pulled into the parking lot of the event hall, laughter spilled out from inside, muffled but warm, the kind of laughter that carries through good wine and bad music. I parked near the entrance and sat there for a moment, watching the shadows move behind the tall windows. For some reason, I hesitated. It wasn't like me to. Maybe I just wanted to collect myself, to make sure my smile looked natural, not forced. I stepped out of the car and straightened my sweater, breathing in the crisp night air. The building glowed with golden light, polished and loud, full of energy. But as I started walking toward the front doors, something caught my eye. A soft flicker of light coming from the back of the hall. It wasn't much, just a glow against the wall, paired with a faint sound of laughter that didn't belong to the crowd inside. A different kind of laughter, private, secretive, and close. Something about that laughter made me stop mid-step. It wasn't the kind of sound you hear at a party. It was softer, closer, tinged with a familiarity I couldn't quite place. My heartbeat picked up, a dull, steady drum in my chest. I looked toward the back lights, noticing how they spilled over the gravel like a trail leading somewhere I wasn't meant to go. I told myself I was being silly. Maybe the staff were just taking a smoke break. Maybe I was overthinking again, like Ryan always said I did. Still, my feet kept moving. I followed the glow, careful on the uneven ground, the sound of my own footsteps mixing with the faint hum of the night. The laughter grew clearer now. A man's low voice, a woman's playful reply. I felt the air change, tighter somehow, like it knew a secret before I did. My palms felt cold even though the night was mild. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I was just a few steps away. I stopped near the corner of the building, frozen in place. I could hear him now. Ryan's voice, unmistakable, deep and familiar, wrapped in a tone I hadn't heard in months. Then came her laugh, light and breathy, almost intimate. My stomach tightened, a quiet storm rising inside me. Part of me wanted to turn around, to stay in that fragile bubble of not knowing. But the other part, the part that needed truth, kept me standing there, listening. I took one more cautious step around the corner, and in an instant, the world just stopped. There he was, Ryan, pressed against the back door, his hands on her waist, his mouth on hers. Samantha. Of all people, Samantha. The woman I'd chatted with at office dinners, the one who always smiled too wide when I mentioned his name. For a second, my mind refused to connect the dots. My body went cold. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. It was like watching a scene from a life that wasn't mine, except it was. He laughed softly against her lips, whispering something I could barely make out. She thinks I'm too drunk to drive, remember? And Samantha, with that same playful smirk I'd seen 100 times before, whispered back, "What if she finds out?" They both laughed. That sound, that cruel, conspiratorial sound, hit harder than any scream ever could. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery. I felt my fingers tremble, but my voice, when it came, was steady, colder than I imagined it could ever be. "You're right," I said, stepping out from the shadows. "You're not too drunk, just too pathetic." The words sliced through the night like glass. They turned, frozen, eyes wide, faces draining of color. For a split second, the power shifted. The shock belonged to them now. Ryan's eyes met mine, wild and searching, like he could somehow rewrite what I'd seen if he just looked hard enough. "Emily, this isn't," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the same pathetic script every liar rehearses when the curtain falls. "Don't," I said quietly, cutting him off. "Every cheater says the same 5 words. It's not what it looks like." My words hung in the air, sharp and unshakable, while Samantha shrank back, her lipstick smudged like evidence. He took a small step forward, reaching for me, and the smell of her perfume hit me before his touch could. That was what finally did it. The scent. Sweet, floral, and so utterly foreign. It was as if every truth I'd ignored over the past year suddenly took shape around me. Late nights at the office, lingering smiles, the way he'd started turning his phone face down. It had all been there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for this moment under those flickering backlights. The silence between us was louder than the music inside the hall. I could hear the faint thump of Bess, laughter, the hum of a world still spinning. Just not mine. "You should probably go back inside," I said, my voice calm but shaking underneath. "Wouldn't want anyone to see you sneaking out the back door." Then I turned before he could answer, before my strength could crack and spill into tears. My footsteps were heavy, steady, final. Each one felt like closing a door I'd never open again. The cold air hit my face as I walked back toward the parking lot, and it felt like stepping out of a dream I never wanted to have. My body moved on autopilot, keys in hand, door unlocked, engine started. But my mind was nowhere near the car. It was still behind that building, under those harsh lights, frozen in the image of him pressed against someone who wasn't me. My hands shook against the steering wheel, and for a second I thought I might scream. But no sound came out, just that dull ache of disbelief that settles in before anger has the courage to show up. I stared out the windshield, trying to breathe through the swirl of thoughts clawing their way through my chest. How long? How many lies did he have to tell to make this look effortless? There's something almost cruel about realizing the person who once felt like home has been practicing deceit in the background, like finding out your favorite song was plagiarized. It steals the meaning right out of it. I finally put the car in drive, my eyes catching the reflection of the event hall in the rearview mirror. The same glow I'd once thought of as warm now looked sterile, almost mocking. I didn't cry. Not yet. There was something colder settling in instead, something calculating, waiting. I didn't know it at the time, but that night didn't just end my marriage. It woke up a part of me that had been sleeping far too long. When I got home, the house felt different, like it knew. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was thick, accusing, echoing with things unsaid. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the framed wedding photo on the wall. We looked so young there, laughing, sunburned, holding hands like the world couldn't touch us. I used to love that picture. Now it felt like a cruel joke, a snapshot of two strangers who had no idea what was coming. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger and whispered to no one. "You said forever." My phone buzzed twice, Ryan's name flashing across the screen. But I didn't answer. I watched it light up, then fade, over and over, until the calls stopped. My reflection in the black screen looked foreign, tired, hollow. I'd thought betrayal would look dramatic, tears, yelling, smashed glasses. But instead, it looked like stillness. The kind that comes when the truth has already won, and all that's left is the sound of your own heartbeat catching up. Eventually, I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just confirmation. Proof that what I saw wasn't some twisted nightmare. I scrolled through his social media, and there she was, Samantha, in photo after photo, work events, dinners, always close, always smiling. And there he was, right beside her, grinning like a man who thought he'd fooled everyone. He hadn't fooled me, not anymore. At some point, I called Julia. She's been my best friend since college, the kind of person who can tell something's wrong just by how you breathe. The moment she heard my voice, she knew. "Emily, what happened?" I told her everything, every detail, the back door, the laughter, the perfume, the look on his face when I caught him. For a second, there was silence on her end, and then came the explosion. "What? You need to throw him out right now!" she yelled, furious, protective, ready to burn the world for me. But I didn't want chaos. Not yet. "No," I said quietly, surprising even myself. "Not yet. I want him to think everything's fine, before I take everything he's built." The words came out cold, smooth, certain. Julia hesitated. "Emily, what are you planning?" I could almost hear her sitting up straighter, worried. "Revenge," I said softly. "The quiet kind." She didn't answer for a moment, but when she finally did, her tone had changed. Part fear, part admiration. "Then be smart," she whispered. "Make it hurt." After we hung up, I just sat there, the glow of the laptop reflecting off the glass of the picture frame. My tears had dried, replaced by something sharper. I wasn't the woman who begged for explanations anymore. I was someone else now, someone who understood the power of patience. Ryan thought he'd fooled me. He thought I'd go to bed, cry, forgive. But I was done playing the wife he expected. The next few days were strange, calm, almost eerily so. I moved through the house like nothing had changed, kissed him goodbye in the mornings, asked about his meetings at night. Every smile I gave him was a mask, carefully measured. He thought my silence meant forgiveness, or maybe denial. I could see it in the way he relaxed around me, like a man who believed he'd dodged the bullet. Let him think that. Let him feel safe. It made what was coming easier to plan. I started watching him the way you study a puzzle, noting patterns, times, excuses. Every late meeting got logged, every nervous glance at his phone stored away. He had no idea I'd synced his messages to my tablet days ago, that I was reading his conversations while he slept beside me. Each word, each emoji, each little lie became another brick in the wall I was building between us. One he'd never be able to climb once it was done. At night, I'd sit by the window with a glass of wine, staring at the city lights, thinking about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love could fix anything. That version of me was gone. Something colder, clearer and stronger had taken her place. I wasn't planning revenge out of rage anymore. It was something else. Precision. Purpose. and I knew exactly when I'd strike. When he least expected it, with a smile on my face. A week later, Ryan's company hosted a networking dinner, one of those polished evenings where everyone practices their smiles, and the food comes in tiny, perfect portions. I suggested we go together like it was nothing. Supportive wife, proud partner, the whole performance. He hesitated, fumbling with his coat, surprised I wanted to be there. You want to come? He asked, relief and a little guilt threading his voice. I just smiled and said, "Of course. You work so hard. I want to meet everyone again." He visibly relaxed, letting that easy grin slide back into place. Inside, the room smelled like citrus candles and expensive cologne, soft music under polite conversation. I sat beside him at the table, watching him laugh at someone's joke, watching Samantha across the room when she caught my eye and looked away too quickly. Everything about the night felt rehearsed, but I played along, asked the right questions, nodded at the right moments, laughed on cue. He leaned in once or twice, grateful I was there. I returned the warmth like a carefully placed prop. No one suspected anything. That was the point. What they didn't know was that I had already printed his messages, the ones that talked about sneaking out the back door, and kept them folded in my purse like a loaded card. I'd synced his phone to my tablet a few nights before, the way someone might test a safe without the owner knowing. Reading those conversations had been like watching a hidden rehearsal of his betrayal. Casual, smug, confident. Tonight, I didn't just attend. I was there with an intention sharper than any toast. The dinner moved slowly, the way these things always do. A carousel of compliments, empty laughter, and too much wine. I could feel Ryan loosening up beside me, his confidence returning like muscle memory. He believed the worst was behind us. Every so often, he'd rest his hand on mine, and I'd let him. Each touch felt like a lie I was allowing him to tell himself. Across the table, Samantha tried to pretend I wasn't there. Her eyes darted anywhere but toward me, and that avoidance was all the confirmation I needed. Fear has a way of betraying even the best poker face. When the host stood to make a toast about teamwork and loyalty, I felt a spark of dark amusement. How poetic, really. Loyalty. I could almost hear the irony whispering between the clinking glasses. Ryan smiled, raised his champagne, completely unaware that his life, the comfortable illusion he'd built, was seconds away from cracking in front of everyone he respected. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. There was only focus. Cold, steady focus. I stood up slowly, smiling politely at the crowd. "Before we toast," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I'd like to make a small announcement." I could feel Ryan stiffen beside me, confusion flashing in his eyes. "Emily," he hissed under his breath, "what are you doing?" I looked at him, the man who once promised me honesty, and smiled wider. "Just sharing something with your colleagues. I believe honesty is important in business. And in marriage." All eyes were on me now. The polite murmur of conversation faded into a sharp, expectant silence. Ryan's face had gone pale, the color draining as fast as his confidence. "Emily, sit down," he whispered, but his voice cracked halfway through my name. I didn't. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and with one simple tap, the projector screen behind the stage came to life. The messages glowed across the wall. His words, her replies, their arrogance immortalized in digital ink. "Can't wait to sneak out the back door again." Gasps rippled through the room like a wave hitting glass. Someone dropped their fork. Samantha's face crumpled as she stood abruptly, eyes wide and tearful, before rushing toward the exit. The sound of her heels against the tile echoed like a confession. Ryan just stood there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. I lifted my glass slowly, keeping my gaze locked on his. "Cheers to transparency," I said, my voice smooth, my smile unshaken. For a long second, no one moved. Then whispers started, cautious at first, then louder, overlapping. The kind of noise that ruins reputations faster than truth ever could. I sat back down, took a slow sip of champagne, and turned to the colleague beside me. "Delicious, isn't it?" I said softly. She nodded awkwardly, unsure what to say. But I wasn't waiting for approval. I'd already said everything that needed to be said. And as I glanced at Ryan's stunned face, I knew this was only the beginning of what he'd lose. The aftermath came faster than I expected. By Monday morning, Ryan's boss had called him in for a conversation. He didn't come home until late that night, and when he did, he looked smaller somehow. His posture slumped, his voice stripped of confidence. "They're reviewing my promotion," he muttered, staring at the floor. "Someone said the company can't afford that kind of attention." I didn't say a word. I just nodded, pretending sympathy while stirring my coffee. Inside, I felt nothing but the clean, steady hum of justice. Actions, finally. Meeting consequences. 2 days later, I met with my lawyer, a calm, sharp woman named Meredith who didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told her everything, every lie, every screenshot, every betrayal. She listened, occasionally jotting notes, her expression unreadable until the end. "You'll be fine," she said, closing her folder. "Better than fine, actually. Given what he's done, we can make sure you keep the house and most of the assets." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a real smile. "Perfect," I said. "Let's make it clean." That evening, Ryan came home early, holding a bouquet like a shield. "Emily, please, can we talk?" His voice trembled with something between guilt and desperation. I stood by the window, watching him struggle for words. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "We can fix this." I turned, slow and steady, and met his eyes, those same eyes that had once felt like home. "You fixed nothing," I said coldly. "You broke something sacred and expected me to look away. You wanted the back door, Ryan. Now use it." He stood there, speechless, his mouth half open as if words could somehow glue back the pieces of what he'd shattered. I watched him, not with anger anymore, but with the kind of calm that comes after a storm has already done its damage. The bouquet trembled slightly in his hands, petals brushing against his jacket as though even the flowers were embarrassed to be there. "Emily," he tried again, voice cracking. "Please, I love you." The words fell flat. Love doesn't survive lies. It starves in them. I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, next to the vase that once held anniversary roses. "Sign them," I said quietly. "Or my lawyer will make it worse." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the sound of endings. He didn't argue. Maybe he finally saw it, that there was no way back into a home he'd burned himself. His signature looked small on the page, almost childlike, like he was admitting defeat with every stroke of ink. I gathered the papers, slid them neatly into my bag, and grabbed my coat. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice faint, desperate. I paused at the doorway. "To rebuild," I said simply. Without lies this time. I opened the door, letting the cool air rush in. For the first time in months, it felt like I could breathe. Behind me, he didn't move. Just stood there, the man who once had everything, now surrounded by the emptiness he'd earned. Walking out of that house felt like shedding a skin that no longer fit. The night air was cool, brushing against my face as I stepped onto the porch. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead there was this strange, steady peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to save something that's already gone. I drove to a small cafe downtown, the same one where I'd sat with Julia years ago, laughing about our future plans. This time there was no laughter, just clarity. I spread the papers across the table, making sure everything was signed and dated. The waitress brought me a slice of lemon pie without me asking. She must have sensed something in my expression, some silent milestone. I took a bite and smiled faintly. It was sweet, sharp, and clean. A taste I'd come to associate with freedom. Ryan would spend the next few weeks untangling his life, explaining, apologizing, spinning stories to anyone who'd listen. But not to me. He no longer had that privilege. When I got home later that night, the house was mine. Legally, emotionally, spiritually mine. His clothes were gone, his toothbrush missing, his scent fading. For a long moment, I stood in the living room, breathing in the quiet. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt new. I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it toward the door, and whispered, "Cheers to transparency." This time, it wasn't revenge. It was closure, the kind that doesn't shout, but smiles. Months passed, and life found its rhythm again. Softer, slower, lighter. I redecorated the house piece by piece, stripping away everything that reminded me of the past. The beige curtains? Gone. The stiff leather couch he'd insisted on? Replaced with something warm and soft. Friends came over on weekends now, laughter spilling into the kitchen, wine glasses clinking, the kind of noise that made the walls feel alive again. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was mine. Every corner, every color, every sound. One evening, I was watering the plants by the window when a knock echoed through the hallway. I opened the door and froze for half a second. Ryan stood there holding flowers. Lilies, of course. His favorite, not mine. He looked older, thinner, like life had caught up to him. "You look amazing," he said softly. "I've missed you." His voice had that same practiced warmth it used to, but it no longer had power. I smiled faintly, not cruelly, just finished. "You always did like what you couldn't keep." He hesitated, eyes flicking to the ring that wasn't on my hand anymore. "Please, Emily, I've changed." I studied him for a moment, then stepped closer, resting one hand gently on the door. "So have I," I said. "I only let love in through the front door now." And then I closed it. Slow, steady, final. The latch clicked, and something inside me did too. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was peace, deep and earned. I stood there for a while, hand still on the doorknob, listening to the soft echo of his footsteps fading down the walkway. For a second, the past flickered, all the years, the laughter, the plans. But it was like watching an old movie you've already seen too many times. You know exactly how it ends, and you no longer feel the need to rewind. I turned around and looked at my home, glowing in the warm light of evening. It finally felt like mine. Not because he was gone, but because I'd stopped waiting for someone else to make me feel whole. That night, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and a glass of wine, the scent of fresh paint and jasmine candles wrapping around me. My phone buzzed once, his name flashing across the screen, but I didn't answer. I let it ring until the sound disappeared into the hum of the quiet house. Instead, I turned on some music, the soft kind that fills the silence without demanding anything back. For the first time in a long while, the quiet felt safe again. As the last note faded, I looked toward the door, my door, and smiled to myself. The kind of smile that comes not from revenge, but from reclaiming what was stolen. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle. And if my life were a story told aloud, the final line would have been simple, whispered like a promise. He left through the back door that night, and I never opened it again.